All right, Mr. Melvin Foote, thank you for joining me today here on the Money and Breakfast podcast, sir. It's a pleasure to speak to you again. I think this is the fourth time we've run into each other, fourth or fifth, first time digitally. But yes, sir. How's everything go?
Okay. Well, it's great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So I want to get right into it. You've got about 40 years of advocacy experience as far as African and U.S. trade policy, really advocating for the diaspora to get more involved in Africa's development, funding infrastructure, creating networks, creating projects and partnerships. A lot of this, one of the crowning achievements of your career is having a big part to do with AGOA. AGOA being, of course, the African Growth and Opportunities Act allowed duty-free access for a medley of products from many developing African countries. Now we fast forward to today. We were in an era of more free trade. Now we're moving more towards an era of protectionism. Regions are starting to look inward, and we've got to sort of a new paradigm as far as what trade looks like internationally. So tell me a little bit about, as far as recently, especially with the tariff schedules and such, how your work has changed and how you're adapting, and how that 40 years of experience has played in what you've had to, how you've had to adapt and learn, just based on, again, an unprecedented environment.
Well, actually, thank you very much. I got started in 1973, so that gives you 50 years, right?
Oh,
And don't hurt myself here, but I got started as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1973 in Eritrea and Ethiopia. I was just out of college and joined the Peace Corps, and they assigned me to Ethiopia. So I went to Africa not knowing anything about Africa because there was no information out about it. And so all we heard about was apartheid in South Africa, Biafra in Nigeria. We heard about famine. And then we heard about Tarzan, the white man who could swing through the trees, the vines in Africa and talk to the animals. And, so for an African American or American in general, what you thought about Africa back then was crazy, wild, and so when I decided to go, I was out in Colorado, went to school out in Colorado, and I had a column in my newspaper called The Back of the Bus. So every week I wrote about Black Americans, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Julian Bond, and so forth. Then I would write more about Black people globally. So a guy wrote me a note and said he wanted to see me. He was a white guy from Michigan who was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana. And he fell in love with his counterpart who was from Ghana, and he wanted my opinion about interracial marriage. Well, I'm not the love doctor. I can't tell you anything about who to love, but I asked him about the Peace Corps. And so he proceeded to tell me about the Peace Corps. My light bulb went up. I said, boy, that's something I want to do. So I graduated in June. In July, I'm headed to Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer. My father said, you're going to get eaten by a lion. And I didn't know, so that's how I got introduced to Africa. It was during the time of Haile Selassie as the emperor. And, they had a major famine going on in the country at the time. And Peace Corps didn't tell you anything about anything. And they said that was internal affairs, stay away from internal affairs. And I learned everything firsthand. I saw the famine firsthand. I met Africa firsthand. They gave you language training, so I spoke Amharic and Tigrinya, so that was interesting. A lot of the local people thought I was an Ethiopian. And so, I spoke a little funny because I had accent and all that kind of thing. But they said, well, maybe he's from another part of the country, or maybe he's from Somalia or Sudan. But they couldn't fathom the fact that I was an African American. And so I've been involved all of that time and been doing all kinds of things. Certainly, AGOA has been a major, that was really the first time. Constituency for Africa started out as a project of an organization called AfriCare. And I was AfriCare's country director in Somalia. They brought me back to the U.S. to head up the effort to educate Americans about Africa. And that evolved into the Constituency for Africa, my organization. We got started in 1990, 94, we became an independent organization. It was at a time when America's foreign policy toward Africa was dropping food out of an airplane. The missionaries would push the U.S. government. They would drop food out of airplanes. So we feeding them. And sometimes that food coming out of the airplane hit people on the head, kill people. It's kind of ironic, but we had no other structure. So a lot of the ambassadors in Washington were advocating for a change in how America looks at Africa. And they wanted a policy based on trade versus just aid. They wanted aid plus trade, but that's when AGOA became the concept for AGOA became realistic. And there was a guy named Mike Williams who was an African American who was chief of staff for Congressman Jim McDermott out in Seattle. And Mike, we became good friends. In fact, we talk even now. He's in Seattle now. Rosa Whitaker was with Congressman Charlie Rangel, but they came to me and said we needed some help building a base of support for this Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. They wanted some grassroots support. So I came up with an ideal of holding town hall meetings around the country. We did about 50 of them in places like Jackson, Mississippi, and Memphis, Tennessee, and New Orleans, and Denver, and Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, Houston, and we would get members of the Congressional Black Caucus to host a meeting. And I would get 4 or 5 African ambassadors to go with me to these meetings. So the local people got a chance to hear from an African ambassador, to shake his hand. And, it was a learning experience for the most part. But the message was, let's lobby your members of Congress to come up with a strategy to increase U.S. trade with Africa. And we want to continue aid if there's refugees and famine and that kind of thing. But we need a new relationship with Africa based on a trade partnership. And that's where AGOA got started. Now, it hasn't really achieved what we had hoped it would achieve, partly because a lot of the African governments were addicted to aid and they couldn't even understand what this trade relationship is supposed to be. And so they didn't push as hard as they should have to meet their side of it. The African side was supposed to train entrepreneurs in the U.S. market. The trade the goal was basically a duty-free policy. In other words, you can import products from Africa. You can export your products to the United States duty-free. So if you're talking about clothing, if you're talking about food, if you're talking about furniture, whatever you got from Africa, if you want to sell it in the U.S., you can sell it in the U.S. without paying duty on it. And that was a big thing. But they couldn't understand it because they always saw when Americans came, we are giving them food. Oh, we're bringing food here. We're bringing water. We're bringing this. We're bringing that. So this was a total different concept for them. So the Africans didn't really respond. They were waiting for another aid program, and AGOA was something totally different. So we went through 25 years of that. I don't think it really achieved what we had hoped it would achieve. But once it became time to expire, then all of a sudden the crying became, and we got to renew, we got to renew, we got to renew. And this is the second time that we're going through it. But we haven't really demonstrated that. If you want to do business in the United States, you got to think about packaging of your goods. If you're talking about food, you got to go through all of the agriculture department, all these specifications and so forth, what kind of fertilizers you're using, all of that. And then you got to think about refrigeration, how you're going to physically get it here. Then you got to think about how you're going to sell it in the store. If you're selling clothing to Americans, recognize that Americans are heavy set. So even the sizing of it has got to be adjusted for American market. The packaging of it got to look good in order for Americans to buy it, because you're going to sell it in Macy's, you're going to sell it in all these stores and so forth. People are going to look at it. If it doesn't look pretty, doesn't look good, it won't sell. So there's a lot of learning that needs to still happen. And so we're trying now to get an extension. I understand we got a 1-year extension. That's not going to do it either. So we still got a lot of fight ahead of us.
So one of the things that I think makes you really interesting, Mr. Foote, is that you are, despite having a long track record yourself and having a lot of experience, you're very much somebody that anybody who talks to you knows that you want youth involvement to be at the forefront. You want a dynamic youth. You talked about training as far as entrepreneurship. I've seen the AGOA duty schedule. I was doing a project on Kenya's on some Kenyan trade relations in grad school, quite large, of course. And in talking with other African students, there's a lot of critique to number one, the old and in many cases current African leadership, but number two, that sort of aid-based model as far as creating those dependencies. So as far as that leadership question goes, I want to ask you two things. Number one, are you seeing any governments now or any leadership now, any organizations on the continent that are maybe make you a bit optimistic, or that you think are doing good work in facilitating sort of the spirit of what the goal was supposed to be? And I also want to ask you about in particular, the industries themselves. Again, talking with other students, talking with colleagues, a lot of what you'll see a lot of agribusiness, you'll see fintech, you'll see health every now and again. But even going back to Africa Diaspora Day on the Hill, this was last October, there was a lot of talk about the media landscape. There was a lot of talk about the manufacturing landscape. What are you seeing as far as those sectors, and do you see anything sort of coming down the pike, that has your interest right now?
Well, I'm hoping that this is an honest conversation. I'm hoping that
Oh
it's
yes,
not
yes,
just a
yes, sir.
political. If you want to have a political spin, I can spin it, I guess.
No,
But
sir, no, sir. We
to be honest with you, Africa came up with what they call the African Continental Free Trade Area a couple of years ago, and there's a guy named Wimkele Mena, who's a Ghanaian, who heads it up. And the idea behind AFCFO is to build a common market among the African countries, to encourage African country one to trade with each other, to take down barriers of the borders and all this kind of thing that prevent Africans from trading with other Africans. I might produce wheat and you need wheat. So rather than to get it from me, you're buying it from Holland or something like that. That doesn't make any kind of sense when your neighbor is, prepared to sell you wheat from his country. All you got to do is get in a truck, package it, and get it across the border and sell it. So the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I find it is dynamic. Kelly Mena is very dynamic himself. He's very hardworking, young guy. And I think it's a good initiative, but I'm not sure Africans are buying into it. The colonial powers, when they colonized Africa, they cut it up into a European, French area, British area. They cut it up. The Italians got a piece, the Germans got a piece, and everybody had their piece. And they were just basically using those colonies to take stuff from it to help the economies of their countries. So there was very little integration of African economies. And
Mm,
so, okay, a colonization period is over, but these countries still got borders. They're trapped by language skills. French, they speak French in part of Africa. The other part, they speak in Portuguese. Another place, they speak in English. So Africans are not able to talk to Africans. So some of the same dynamics that we as African Americans are faced with over here in terms of our own struggles, you'll find that Africans are also caught up in dealing with the issues of colonialism, which artificial barriers that should not be existing. So I'm not sure that the Western world, including the United States, I'm not so sure that we want these countries independent, free, and able to make unified decisions. If Africa decides that they don't want to sell oil and gas and coltan and minerals to the United States, we got a problem. So one of the ways they keep that flowing is to keep Africa fragmented, keep it divided, keep it corrupt. Buy off the leader, let him be the leader for 100 years, even long as he's selling to us. Uh, so that's what we're up against, quite frankly, is how do we get organized enough? Then you add on top of that, how does Africa relate to its diaspora? You got all of these African
yeah, yeah, big
Americans and
piece.
African immigrants who are here. Many of us are working in businesses, factories, industry that could be really helpful in terms of building the partnership with the United States. One, we love Africa, so we're not going to let America exploit Africa without a fair, a fair payment, because we are African American, and so for uh, for our country, that means we're not trustworthy. They say we're not 100% in with America. Well, we're not. We're African American. We want America to win, and we want Africa to win. What's wrong with that? If you're German American, you want Germany to win, and you want America to win. If you're British American, you want Britain to win, and you want America to win. But when it comes to Africa, you want to win, but you don't want Africa to win. And so that is the crux of the fight that we're in. In terms of the industry, everybody knows that Africa needs a lot of stuff, uh, but a lot of what Africa needs, we're not really ready to help out. We're not going to build industries in Africa to allow Africans to produce goods. There are places where they have car factories. They assemble car plants, but Africa could be doing a lot more in that area. There are places where pharmaceuticals, a lot of the ingredients for the pharmaceuticals that we use originate in Africa. Why don't we produce this and manufacture it in Africa and sell it to the world? Now, what we do, we take the ingredients, put it on a ship, send it to Belgium or to Germany or to the U.S. where it's produced. And if Africa needs that very same medicine, we sell it back to them. Of course, the price is going to be high. As of course, very few people got to be able to afford it. So some of this is because the world does not want to see Africa rise. If Africa rises, they feel like they will go down. Certainly, all of the European countries are dealing with aging populations, and so if it wasn't for Africans coming from Africa, who's going to take care of these old people? That really what it boiled down to. So a lot of the economies in Europe are really slipping fast. France no longer has access that it had even a few years ago in the Sahel and places like Mali and Burkina Faso
Mhm.
and Niger.
Pensions are being
France does
frozen in
not
other
have
places.
control like they had before. And so, what do they do? Where is the uranium going to come from? Where is this going to come from if Africa is not giving it to them? And that's where we are.
So, it's interesting that you talk about sort of the institutional part of things as far as the industries that can be built, like getting, especially some of the big value adds, some of the big value add industries, some of the sort of, bigger targets that you would want in a country's development. I want to ask you this before I go back to a piece about Africa Diaspora Day. So, a lot of times when you enter into the discourse, around African development, around developing countries in general. Perhaps you're in a conversation about BRICS. Perhaps you're in a conversation, about the global South. Whatever nomenclature might be used. Sometimes you'll see comparisons made. Does it make sense for Africa, for this or that African countries or the continent more broadly to adopt some practices for example, China comes up a lot. India comes up at times. For certain sectors of success, you actually might see a model on the continent. For example, I believe there's some large infrastructure projects going on in Ghana that are, that are based on some very creative partnerships that are, non-exploitative but still mutually beneficial. So in terms of just global models like that, do you see any models like that? Do you perceive? I'm not even sure if you think that way. In terms of just this is a good development model for maybe the long term or indefinitely as far as what this or that country has done. Do you look anywhere in particular, or does anything catch your eye as far as maybe there should be this more of this going on the continent?
Well, when I first went to Africa in '73, the Chinese were in Africa then, but they were playing table tennis. They were, selling firecrackers and cheap shoes and that kind of thing. That was the limit of Chinese involvement in Africa. Fast forward to today, now when you land in just by any country in Africa now, you land at an airport that was built by China. That the railroad that goes along the highway, built by China. That highway that you're on taking you from the airport to downtown, built by China. That port that you see those ships are docking at, built by China. In other words, China had invested heavily into Africa infrastructure. And you go to places in Africa, you're amazed at how things have changed over the last 40, 50 years due to Chinese investment in Africa. Now, the U.S. and the West, by and large, have not invested in infrastructure. And they're giving you money and doing this social kind of a thing and trying to help you with health care and refugee assistance and that kind of thing, whereas China invested in infrastructure. And you really see, so if I'm an African on the ground in Africa and I see a Chinese man coming, I'm going to listen because they're talking about the stuff that I really do need to happen to make my country grow. But when I see a Westerner come, if I see an American come, or I see a British come, or something like that, maybe I don't pay attention to them because they're not addressing my real need. And the real need in Africa is infrastructure. The real need is really manufacturing jobs, where you're not just taking the raw materials out of Africa, putting them on a ship, and sending them somewhere. You're actually manufacturing on the ground in Africa, creating jobs and economy for the people who live there. The Chinese are much more attuned to that kind of thing as opposed to us in the West. We tend to be on the social side, and well, we want to be your friend, and we'll take the leaders out and buy them new clothes and all this kind of thing just to get access to the money. But the Chinese are more invested in the infrastructure.
I'm glad you mentioned that nuance of, in particular, manufacturing. I had I won't say where I attended this talk. I don't feel it's necessary, but I did attend a talk regarding African development. There was there were a few people on stage giving their ideas, and there was one gentleman. He had, I believe, he had written a book, or he was sort of espousing his philosophy that it made more sense given the state of the world, given where technology is. He spoke from the lens of the lens of comparative advantage. So he said uh, that it was better for many African countries to lean heavier into services, digital, digital means of income and tourism versus manufacturing industrialization. Frankly, I thought this was ridiculous on its face. That made absolutely no sense to me at all. But I'd like to hear you speak to that as far as just being somebody who's more experienced and who has watched industries develop from nascent to sort of ongoing, more robust things that last.
Well, I don't see it as a either or. I see Africa taking advantage of both. I think, for instance, let's say sports, a creative industry, dance, modern dancing. Let's take food. Let's take clothing. Let's take hairstyle. Let's take fashion. Let's take, what I remember when Manute Bol from Sudan got into the NBA. He was a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
Manute was like 7 feet 6 and bony as all get out. But these South Sudanese are drinking a lot of camel milk, strong. You're looking at this big, tall, bony guy, and you think he's a pushover. Wrong. And so that started the parade of Africans who are now, say, in the National Basketball Association. Keem Olajuwon, who played for Houston, had this great shot. I mean, Nigeria, we didn't think the Africans could play basketball because we thought basketball was us African American. I played basketball at college. I mean, we thought that it was in our genes or something. Now we're finding out that there's Africans on the ground in Africa who might be 7 feet 5 inches tall, like Wimbiana down in San Antonio. Got a jump shot, look like a guard, the way the guy moves. There's a lot of talent in Africa that is now rising to the surface. We see a lot of fashion, we see a lot of design that's become global now. Which I think is going to continue off in the future. It's not like Africans don't have talent. Africans got a lot of talent. but now that talent is drifting up. Uh, we're seeing it in all aspects of life. And so I think the creative industries is one area that Africa can dominate. The young people in Africa, we're looking at music. We're thinking, but when you start talking about Burna Boy and Nas and all these other young musicians and so forth who are driving the industry. They're not just drive. You look at the movie industry. Africans are dominating a lot of this, and it's going to continue going forward. And so it gets into the business of the sports. It gets into the business of movie making, the business of food processing and marketing and branding and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of young Africans, especially those from the diaspora who are going home, they went to school over here, and been over here 15, 20 years, going back home, knowing what they know here. A lot of that is happening. So I think that the next generation. Then if you look at population distribution, many of the countries in Africa, you'll find that 70% of the population is under 30 years old.
Hmm.
You know, you got these old folks over there dying off, and as you the massive young population boom in many countries are taking over. And that's why the Generation Z in Africa is serious. They're taking out governments, they had this black YouTuber, you may have heard about this. I show speed. You
Yeah,
should have
that's
heard
not.
about
Yes,
him. I mean,
I know
that's
he's
your
going.
age.
He's going up.
That boy is remarkable.
He's a bit. He's a bit.
Huh?
That's my younger cousin and such. But no, I've seen some clips. He's going around. He's in Zimbabwe. He's in Ghana. He's in Nigeria. And I did notice a lot of people were very, very impressed with Benin, the infrastructure, the city planning. They had no idea it was there, but because it's
They
got
didn't know it.
around.
He showed it all.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the big thing for me. And there's always that. Sometimes I see. Sometimes when I see, and I think this happens in both an African American and an African context, is sometimes when there's been like a bad habit that's been going on that you spot for too long, you tend to react, maximally in the other direction against the habit. And I say this in the context of like, people critique the role that entertainment, like the creative industries play. The creative industries play. They see they play a too outsized the role. But I admire the fluidity in your thinking because you're not going either or. And I can think of a few situations even off the top of my head. I believe we were talking about basketball. I'm a big NBA fan myself. I believe was it not it was Lou Deng or somebody that helped fund, I believe, the South Sudanese basketball program, and they almost beat the United States. Literally the best
He coached
basketball
them
team,
and also
in
funded
my
them.
opinion. LeBron had to make a game-winning shot in order for them
Yeah.
not to lose to South Sudan. Like the greatest of all time had to step in, again, in my opinion. But that says a lot about the talent that's going on out there.
That's very true. And if you look at women basketball, and Chine Owemiki and her sister, she was on my board for a while. Man, I mean, they're not only are they talented, and very physically able, but they're also very sharp.
Mhm.
Many of them who come to school over here, they don't just go to any old school just to get into school. They go to Stanford, they go to Columbia, they go to Harvard, and
Georgetown.
then they look for the business administration. They go look for the science, and it ain't like they're running away from chemistry. Now, many of us,
Mhm.
we're looking for the PE department. Teach me something about basketball or something, But what I find with a lot of the immigrants, they come with a whole different mindset, and they're not afraid to learn something. And some of it goes back hundreds of years. The process of slavery really damaged us over here. I was the first one in my family to finish college,
Mhm.
and no one where I grew up, we were still running away from Jim Crow and slavery, really. And the only way I went to college because I played basketball, right? And I had a hook shot, like Anyway, that's another discussion. But uh, but you'll find these Africans have figured it out early, and they'll pool their money to send one of them to school at Oxford or somewhere to represent the family, right? Because the family was still very much intact in Africa, whereas we as Black Americans, been sold around up and down the river and divided and fragmented to the point where we don't have the unit to support us in that regard. So we have a lot of work to do in that regard. But I think Africans, are taking advantage. What Trump is now making it difficult for Africans to remain in the U.S. or even get a visa for the U.S. Many of them are opting to stay in Africa, and it may backfire on Trump. It may well backfire on Trump because they'll put their energy into building up Dakar and Lagos and Accra and these cities in Africa, using technology and making these kind of connections. And that gets into, one of the things that we as a diaspora can do. We ought to be partnering with Africans every chance we get. We
Mm,
should be meeting them while we're in college and that kind of thing, building entrepreneurship, figuring out what you need over here. I got that covered, and you got that underground in Africa covered. But the ideal being that we're going to benefit Africa people. I think a new kind of model is going to emerge uh, coming out of some of the stuff we're seeing today.
So, I think that your situation is a bit unique because, you joined the Peace Corps sort of right out of the gates there. And, you were able to go on the ground, get firsthand experience. And now, I mean, frankly, it's very hard to fool you, I imagine. It's very hard to propagandize you because, again, you're somebody who,
It's impossible. Impossible.
as George Bush once said, fool me, can't get fooled again. But,
You can't be.
but, But, in terms of just, we want to you wanna create these networks, you wanna create these connections, you wanna aggregate people together, in order to do this work, and you also want people to have the mindset of like, for example, just even going back a second to what I was saying earlier, like, you know, Luol Deng funding the South Sudanese basketball program, great. Unless I'm getting my players confused, but regardless, funding the South Sudanese basketball program, great. Some of these guys are going to go to the league, great. Now, some of those guys that go to the league, I want those guys focused on paving roads, building bridges, you know, doing something real big with the hundreds of millions there. So for somebody who is a young person who wants to get involved, who's like, okay, I'm right here. I'm right now. Maybe I'm in college. Maybe I'm out of college. Whether I'm in the U.S. or whether I'm on the ground in the African continent. Uh, how do I get involved right here, right now? In Melvin Foote's opinion, where should I move towards to start to look to make meaningful contributions here? What
Yeah.
steps do you have a person take? How would you develop a person in that regard?
That's a very good question. It's a very good question. Very fair question. Um, I think like today, the looking at our country today. This is the most shocking and dispirited time that I've known. My daughter was followed me she went to the Peace Corps. Then she went to Ithaca College. Well, she got her undergrad at Ithaca College. She got her master's degree at Georgetown University.
All right.
And then she joined USAID, and she went to Jamaica as a foreign service officer. And she was on a rocket, come Donald Trump, and boy, he dismantled USAID last year. So
Mhm.
she lost her job, like many others, and totally dispirited. What can I do now? Because I'm a diplomat. I got a diplomatic passport. I'm just on a rocket, and clearly we're preparing to make a much bigger contribution that's going to benefit not only Africa but African people. It's going to benefit the United States because you're going to have people moving around Africa with a whole lot of knowledge and experience and understanding about how best we can fit in and get things done. So there's a lot of people out there right now with the tremendous talent, tremendous skill, who are out of work, and wondering about their future. So one of the things I can say about me that has enabled me to do what I've done in my career is I stayed focused. Now I stayed focused 50 years. I'm at 73. I went to the Peace Corps in Ethiopia. I've been involved in Africa ever since. So for 50 years, I've been involved in Africa one way or another. I worked at Meharry Medical College for a couple of years as the assistant administrator for the International Center, but working on Africa. Like I said, I joined Africare, went to Somalia for 3 years as country director for Africare. I came back and, headed up the effort to educate Americans about Africa. But everything I've done in this 50 years has been focused around the same mission. And so, one piece of advice I would give to young people is once you decide on what your mission in life, what is your mission and your strength in life is, stay focused like a laser beam and
Mhm.
stay on it. The problem comes in is all of a sudden you go, over here, I'm doing this. Over there, I'm doing that. And 5 years later, you haven't moved at all. But I went from a lowly Peace Corps volunteer where I actually now shape U.S. policy toward Africa. I've actually had impact on billions of dollars that have flown to Africa. I've met a number of the presidents, the U.S. presidents. I gave them things to do. I gave Obama the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI. That came from me. I gave him the idea for the U.S. Africa Summit. I wrote the concept for it. And I called it a White House conference on Africa, and I was thinking it was going to be in the White House, but it morphed into a trade conference, and I'm happy about it. So I think the next generation, what you have that I didn't have, you have access to technology that was not even dreamed of. We were typing letters by hand back then, and now we're got AI at our disposal, and we got all kinds of technology that you got to be under 30 years old to understand it. Under 30 years old. And you might have to be under 20 years old to understand it. But so this is the future of the world is going to be in this technology. And I think that the next generation, but you got to dispel the notion that you got to go get a job with IBM or Coca-Cola or, some big white corporation in order to define yourself. That may not be the world that you're going to be into. But I think the ideal is having connections globally. In the diaspora, you can do it by this kind of technology all the time. There's no reason
Yep.
why we can't have entrepreneurs in Africa on the same call talking about doing something in Zimbabwe or doing something in Namibia or doing something in Ghana. It's possible now. I do calls all the time with people on the ground in Africa in real time about real things. So I think we have to use the technology that currently available. I think there's a lot more information out there now about Africa and business opportunities and so forth. All you got to do is stay focused on it and do some digging on it. But it's a lot more out there now than say when I came along. I had to go to the library, found an atlas to discover that Ethiopia was not in the Middle East. I thought Ethiopia was in the Middle East because of the Bible, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and Ethiopia. And so, I didn't want to go to the Middle East because they're fighting in the Middle East. And so, so I went to the library and found an atlas and saw a map of Africa and Ethiopia right in the heart of Africa. Wow, that was a revelation for me. I don't think that young people today have that problem. You can actually Google it and find it out what's going on. So you got access to information that we only could dream about back then, and at your disposal. And then it's a matter of preparing yourself. Success is no more than preparation meeting opportunity. You got to have the skill, you got to have the access to be able to get things done. I spend a lot of time with young folks. I just do it. And when young people call me up and ask me to be on a panel or something like that, or they want some advice, I try to be available to them because I didn't have anybody to really call on. You had the Leon Sullivans and the Randall Robinsons back then, but they were so big up in the clouds, you didn't have access to them even.
Right.
But I said, okay, if I get the chance to help mentor and encourage the next generation, I'm going to do it. And I think there's others out there who are like-minded, who recognize that we're only links in the chain. My job is to pass it on to the next generation.
Very, very well said. So there is, and whenever I discuss Africa with anybody, I talk about this particular project. I'm sure you've heard of this gentleman, a young Ghanaian man by the name of Shadrach Frimpong. Is that
Yeah.
something about? Yeah. So for just to give the audience context, Shadrach Frimpong, he has a project in going on in Ghana right now. I believe still going on. Coco 360, I believe, is the name. And essentially, it is a model in which you take a community, like a rural community. They were already, Ghana, a lot of cocoa in Ghana. They already sort of farm cocoa. It's just a matter of culture, a matter of mutual aid, a matter of just, day to day life. So this was the model in which a cocoa field was established, and people could come. A cocoa field was established, and then also a health clinic was established, and a person could come and work in the cocoa field as they're already culturally, used to doing, under normalized hours, under a formal structure, and with that, they get free access to that healthcare clinic. The healthcare clinic, of course, is going to fund itself with the proceeds, from the cocoa, from selling the cocoa, processing the cocoa, and it's just one of the it's one of those. It's a very creative structure, which I love, and I bring this up because after the panel on Africa Diaspora Day on the Hill last October, which you sat on, the trade panel. Right after that came the finance panel, and a lot of the conversation there was around capital access. It was around bankability. It was around creative finance. It was around making sure that one could put a project together that could interact with institutional finance in any form. How do you think that wanting to accomplish that goal plays with frank the frank financial incentives that you laid out earlier, in which you know if Africa is in a position where it's not exporting raw materials anymore, it's not even necessarily that your business might be destroyed, but your margins are going to decrease because
Okay.
more of the supply, more things are happening down the supply chain in Africa itself. How do you think that you meld those two together, as far as just interacting institutionally, but also holding one's own, accessing the finance, and really getting these projects executed?
Well, the project you referred to, I mean, I think there's a lot of really interesting things that go on in Africa. A lot of interesting things that go. Some of them in areas of tourism. I went to see the pyramids with a group of Africans from across Africa who wanted to see the pyramids themselves. And so when I got to Egypt, the group I was with were all African from Africa who wanted to see Africa. I thought that they would have already, and so I think there's a lot of really interesting models out there that I think the next generation are embracing. And I think they cannot be dependent on the West. They really can't be dependent on anybody. They got to be careful about anybody who because history has showed us that all the outsiders, all they want out of Africa are these minerals. They want the oil, the gas, the coltan, the lithium, and all this kind of stuff. And they don't give a darn about the quality of life of the people there. In fact, there are people in the world who wouldn't care if all the Africans were to die. They can go and bring in the machines and bring in some robots and get those minerals. And this is what we're up against in reality. So I think interesting models are here to be developed. There's all kinds of possibilities out there. I go to a lot of different meetings from time to time, and I hear it all. But I do think that the only way that we really going to get somewhere is if we can get unified. One, Africa must unify. If it doesn't become one country, or at least 3 or 4 countries, you know, it doesn't need to be 54 countries, that's for sure. And what the U.S. is proving right now is we could take one little small country and we can tie them down and get them to do whatever we want them to do because they don't have any other options. And this is what Trump is presenting today, is that he demanded that countries take people that we deport from our country and put them in Swaziland or put them in Rwanda or something. Just crazy stuff. Africans got to bow down and yes, and do it, which is going to lead to nothing but more warfare and more conflict. So Africa has got to unite itself politically, economically, and otherwise. Ideally, Africa must unite with its own diaspora. And there were efforts made in that regard. Excuse me. There were efforts made in that regard, but by and large, they've been taken apart, dismantled, and there's all kinds of barriers to try to prevent us from really building these partnerships with Africa and African people around the world be it in Jamaica, be it in Bahamas, be it in Haiti. You know, there's efforts to make sure we don't unite, and we better know these efforts are well funded. They see it in their own interest if the black world was to unite and do business with itself and do business on its own terms, then that means countries like ours are going to suffer. And so, what this administration definitely is keen toward is making sure that the progress that we're talking about, the kinds of businesses that we're talking about, never really take hold. And that's what we're up against. That's where the fight is going forward.
So I want to talk about the education piece a bit as well. Very well said again. Um, One of the things, as far as, you have members of the diaspora that might be educated in the West, whatever level of schooling they went to, you often hear it, whatever level of school, whatever school level of schooling they have, going back into the African continent, and there being these sort of cultural clashes where there's concern that Western education diaspora may bring in Western ideals, Western ways of thinking, in the sense that these are not useful to solving the current problems of development, pushing development forward. And then there's also a concern on the other side that think well-meaning, well-intentioned people might be wholesale rejected because of where they happen to get their education, where they happen to find themselves at a particular time. Have you seen? Do you have any early thoughts on like bridging that gap, squaring that circle, making sure separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, as far as the technical sides of things, as far as actually deploying useful information to complete projects, businesses, partnerships, networks, sort of across the diaspora there.
Well, that's been the work of my organization, really, CFA. That really has been the work, what we've been trying to do. In the early days, we got funding from Ford Foundation, Carnegie Corporation, Chevron, and several other sources. That money has dried up, and it was intentional. You know, somebody said if you give Mel Foote $5 million, no telling what he's going to do. He's going to have these Africans and African Americans working, and they're going to work against us. And so what they did, they make the decision, cut off the funding. It is not just my organization. You'll find out now that the NAACP funding is down. The Congressional Black Caucus funding is down. Urban League's funding is down. They basically defunded all of these black organizations so that they can't do some of this stuff of building unity. Now, most Americans are uninformed, underinformed, and misinformed about Africa, including African Americans, because who's educating us about this stuff? It's not happening in the public schools. It's not happening in the public domain. And so, in order for you to really get educated about it, you got to be deep into going to the library. You got to be deep into going to community meetings where you can. You got to come to CFA meetings when you can. You got to do all kinds of things to educate yourself about Africa. You really do. You got Africans in the community here. They've been miseducated about us. And so when they brought Africans over here to go to school and give them scholarships and that sort of thing, you'll find out that they sent them to Nebraska and they sent them to Iowa and Kansas and Montana and places like that. And they end up getting a PhD at Purdue and a PhD from Kansas State and blah, 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 at the highest level. But then when you meet them here in Washington, because they bring them to Washington to work at in the bureaucracy and so forth, you'll find out by the time they come to Washington, they hate us. They've been told these black Americans are this and the black Americans are that. And it's amazing. I met a lot of African immigrants in my work. One time they brought me to Kansas State to speak to the Africa Club, and that's out in Manhattan, Kansas. And I got down there, I met some brilliant Africans, PhD and all this kind of thing. But Lord knows they didn't have a clue about the struggle among black Americans. The same thing with Yali when the Yali program was under Obama. They would be assigned to different programs around the country depending on their interests. But at the end of the program, they brought them all to Washington for a summit, and I got a chance to meet almost every one of them. And I can say that there was a lot of misunderstanding about the black community here, and a lot of misunderstanding about black Americans about Africa. And I say that that's intentional, you know. And this is what we've been fighting for centuries, really. And it hasn't gone away. And so I still work very hard to try to change that. But a lot of African immigrants were thinking that black Americans are the problem. You know, we don't want to work or we don't want to go to school, not really understanding about all of this Jim Crow stuff and all the stuff that black Americans are going through. But they've been educated to think that we are the problem, you know. And so now they find themselves getting expelled from the country. They're finding themselves being harassed by the police. And now they wake up and say, wow, we didn't know this thing happened to black people. Well, it's been happening to us, you know, for decades, for centuries. But now they're saying that this ain't just about black American, it's about black people. And so now we're getting some sense of we need to work together. But it may be a little bit too late. We got a lot of work to do to rebuild the linkages and the relationships between African Americans and Africans.
It's an uphill battle, and I'll say that, just being a bit on the younger side myself, social media both hurts and helps in this regard. I definitely I saw a lot of, no, I saw a lot of, like I said, a lot of chatter around the whole speed thing, around
Yeah.
Africon rather, you know, but you're seeing a lot of outpouring of support go across borders, which, you hope continues and hope doesn't dissipate, just around the aftermath of a sports competition, no matter how proud Senegal made a lot of people. So we're getting towards the end of our time here. I just wanted to give you the floor and allow you to spotlight any projects, any people, any networks, any organizations that are doing the kind of work that over Melvin Foote's 50 years of Africa advocacy, of work in Africa, thinking about Africa, dreaming about Africa. What Melvin Foote has seen is most productive. Who are these people? Where are these things happening? What's going on that makes you optimistic in your work after all this time?
Well, I'm not optimistic, actually, but I'm writing my book. I'm writing my book. The book will be entitled "Opening Doors to Africa." It'll be half of it will be memoir over the 50 years. The people I met: Nelson Mandela, Bishop Tutu, Jerry Rawlins, name them. I met them, you know, and generally spent good time with them, you know. Um, and so there's a lot of stories to be had. I was the man in the Horn of Africa for a while. And, here I am in the Horn of Africa, and I speak Amharic, I speak Tigrinya, I speak some Somali, I speak some Arabic. And how do they see me, you know? And they didn't have a concept of an African American doing these kinds of things. And so I see myself very much as a bridge builder. Um, I think, Black Americans have always had struggle. And so what we're seeing today is nothing new. We think that this is bad. You know, you all see what our parents went through. You know, and so I think that our people are going to rise up. I'm encouraged by this next generation. I Speed is just another guy in Ghana named Wole Mayo. He's a young Ghanaian, what they call himself, streamer, and a dynamic guy. In fact, I had a friend who just met him in Dubai, and he's going to arrange for me to have a conversation. He briefed him on who I am. So I envision now that these guys have met, they met in Ghana. In fact, Woody Mayo hosted him in Ghana, which was the last stop on his tour. And you better know that some serious connections have been made with them. I see myself as also engaging with that next generation, that Z generation, to add what I add to it. But I want to be the mentor. I want to be the one who just giving advice, lessons learned, and that kind of thing. That's what I didn't have coming up. All the guys that preceded me wanted to be the king themselves.
Mm.
And my boss told me when I got pushed out of Africa in 1994, I got pushed out of Africa. My boss told me one day, he said, look, he gave me that job. You're going to be the outreach coordinator. He said, you're going to be the voice of Africa. Well, I became the voice of Africa. Next thing you know, I'm in Ebony magazine, I'm in Jet magazine, I'm in Emerge magazine. And because I was moving around to various conventions, the AKA convention, the Lynx convention, Jack and Jill, and so forth. So my boss saw me as getting too big. And he said, there's going to be one spotlight at Africare. And he said the spotlight was going to be on him. And I was given 2 weeks to leave. And I didn't know, I didn't want to, I was happy there. I didn't want to leave, but I was pushed out and I had to form my own organization. I've done okay. But, at the time, it was traumatic for me. So I just think that we have no choice but to go forward. I think that the next generation, the young people are going to get it together. I think that white people are going to change, not just in America, but worldwide. They got to change if the world is to survive. Because a lot of these things that we're dealing with are bigger than humans. We're talking about environmental crisis. We're talking about the global warming. We're talking about water issues. We're talking about disease that there's no known cure for. And so if we as humans don't get our act together and get beyond this color thing, I think that the future of the world is at stake here. And so I'm hoping that once we get past some of these old men who are holding on to power, clinging on to power, holding us back, maybe this next generation will rise up and give us a world that we all can live in peace and harmony and continue forward.
Definitely. One more, one last thing, I can't not ask. Would you mind giving us your favorite Nelson Mandela story? Anything notable that comes to mind?
Well, I met Mandela. I met Mandela when he came out of prison in 1994, and he came to Washington. I was part of the group that met with him, and I was enamored with this guy, and I since after that I went to South Africa, I went to Cape Town, and I toured the prison that he was held at, 27 years in prison. But for this guy to come out of prison for 27 years, 1990, and then he ran for president and became president of South Africa in 1994, and had no hatred toward the whites who had, the apartheid whites who had, he gave us a whole sense of, it wasn't you personally, it was the system that you were beholden to. And let's build a new nation that were black people, white people, Indian people, who are all South African, can live in harmony. And to me, that's a message that resonates throughout the world. When I look at what the leadership we have in the world today, and I look at someone like a Nelson Mandela, wow, there's no comparison whatsoever. As a human, he was in his 80s and 90s. He was old then, but he understood that I'm not going to be here forever, but I want to leave the world a lot better than it was before, and he worked hard to make that happen. So, but it was amazing, and I can say that I met a lot of them. I met Muhammad Ali, and when I look back and think about some of these people that I've had a chance to interact with, Dick Gregory was another one that I went to Africa with him,
Oh, wow.
just a lot of, but a lot of it would be in the book, so you'll have to pay the 49.99. Maybe we'll
49.99.
give you a discount. Huh?
That's pretty steep. That's above. That's up and above. That's hard.
No, 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 no. The price is
Tell
going
you
up.
what. I'll
Price
tell
is
you what.
going.
I'll tell you what. You give me an autographed copy, I'll give you $100.
Amen. Done. Go ahead and send it to me, okay?
Yes,
Cash out.
indeed. Yes, indeed. Mr. Foote, thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm sure this is not the last time we'll talk because I'm going to keep attending conferences. I know you will too. This is your life's work, and I'm hoping to contribute. Do my part in pushing things forward as well. That's why I wanted to have the conversation. That's why I wanted to keep in contact. So, thank you again, sir, for your for your work and for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing the copy.
We'll do. We'll do. That'll be out in very, very shortly, sir.
All right.